So the Avata itself is a great drone which will give you that mind-blowing experience if you never tried FPV before. Now the footage alone coming from the Avata's 4K camera is outstanding, but if you ever experience shooting a sequence and looking at the footage in your editing software to realize that it looks a bit too sharp and that the playback has stuttering, even after slowing the clips down to match the project's FPS. The reason you're experiencing this is because you either shot your clips using the auto settings or that you had to crank up your shutter speed in manual settings to get a properly exposed image. So if we take a look at these two clips, one is recorded using the auto settings and one is recorded using the manual settings to properly expose the image. Since I'm filming in bright conditions, both these clips ends up with a way too high shutter speed, which makes the image unnatural and too sharp. It's just like when you're out driving your car or doing a hike, and if the sun is shining, you usually wear sunglasses, right? Because it's more comfortable and makes it easier to see. The same goes for the camera lens. The lens is more comfortable with balanced settings. So if I put some sunglasses on the Avata, it will be much happier. So happy that it will give me a much better image in return. So the optimal settings for cinematic videos using the Avata is to have the ISO as low as possible and a proper shutter speed according to your frame rate. But even when putting the ISO on 100, it might not give you the perfect exposure you're looking for. So to help the ISO correct the exposure, the easiest way is to crank up the shutter speed, right? Which will decrease the time the shutter stays open, meaning the image gets darker for each value increased. But the more we increase the shutter speed, the worse our image will look when we are flying. It will also remove that natural motion blur which is obtained when having a lower shutter speed. It can also result in stuttering, a sharper image, and make it harder to color grade. Looking at these two shots side by side, we can see the difference between using and not using ND filters with the Avata. The Avata is an FPV drone, so it flies much faster than a normal drone. So by using ND filters when you're flying makes a huge difference. And it's a must-have to get better quality footage and to maintain the natural motion blur through a properly set shutter speed. So the optimal shutter speed is always the double of your record settings. So if you're recording in 4K 60 FPS, your shutter speed should be no higher than 120, which is the double of 60 FPS. Now to get the perfect exposure when we're out shooting those cinematic videos with the Avata, we can also use sunglasses or ND filters, which they are called. Using ND filters, you can easily put your shutter speed to the double of your frame rate and then put the ISO to auto if you don't want or have time to change the settings each time you're out flying. A tip here is to set the ISO on auto and change the max ISO to either 4 or 800. And by doing this, you will always have the natural motion blur and the perfect shutter versus frame rate, as well as having the ISO adjust itself. But using manual settings will always be the best because you can lock the different parameters and they won't shift during your flight. Now links to the ND filters that I'm using will also be down in the description below. Now by having a perfect exposure, your image will not only look better, but you will have a much easier process when editing your footage. It will be easier to color grade, slow down, speed ramp, and more. Now for some reason, my Avata decided to take its own life. Rest in peace. I lost all the footage recorded on the Avata. I have no idea how this happened. I was flying in manual mode, did a normal turn that I've done 1,000 times, maybe 100 times, and yeah, it just, flipped, whatever, something. You can see it here on in the footage as well, and just landed in this tiny pool of water. And yeah, I tried to save it, but I don't think it's savable. Salt water, worst thing, and I have a new one coming my way pretty soon. So I'm really excited for that to get a new one so I can continue flying my favorite FPV drone ever. Now that's gonna be everything for today. I really hope that you learned something from today's video, and if you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Also give this video a like if you really liked it, or if you loved it, that would also be appreciated. So until next time, take care, and I will see you in the next video.